What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, I want to get to a couple things. As always, we got 3 segments to knock out here on the podcast. The Monday edition of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac a little bit later on in the show. I want to talk a little bit of fantasy lacrosse with you guys, get a little bit of that discussion in the mix here on the show. I also want to get to later on to round out the show. I want to get to one thing to watch for with each of these 8 clubs in the PLL the last 2 weeks of the regular season as we make our push towards the playoffs here in the Premier Lacrosse League. But to start out the show, I want to talk about the All-Star game from Sunday night in San Jose, because I really found myself, I think, only partly paying attention to the game. You know, like you'd kind of zone in and out throughout the game, at least I did, and really paying attention, like when you saw a highlight reel play happening, you wanted to definitely pay attention to that, like when we saw the goalie go behind the back for that goal on the breakaway, you know, things like that, or when Costabile hit the backflip after hitting that deep shot. So I really found myself, I think, only partly paying attention to the game here and there, almost having it on in the background as some background viewing, but I definitely did pay attention to that halftime show that they put on for the fastest shot challenge. I thought that was really fun to watch, and seeing those guys just absolutely ripping shots upwards of 115, almost 120 miles an hour. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. I'm pretty sure the fastest shot I've ever registered on a radar gun was about 58 miles an hour. So those guys were going out there and ripping shots literally twice as fast as what I can do. So that was just absolutely ridiculous and entertaining to watch. But I enjoyed seeing guys like Adam Gittleman playing out of his normal position and playing hard while doing it, like going out there and actually making plays when playing a position that they don't normally play on a given weekend in the PLL. So seeing him with a regular position stick and actually going out there and making plays and actually playing hard at both ends of the field, I thought was really fun. And guys like Ryan Boyle were sitting up in the booth going, so do we just call him a short stick D mid? Like what is he out there to actually do? But no, he got up and down the field and made some plays. So that was, I think, really fun to watch for all of us lacrosse fans. And Tim Troutner in the cage was just an absolute stud. I know my buddy Phil Rothermick, who's a big Troutner fan, I'm sure he loved watching him ball out in the cage on Sunday night. And the wild thing to me about the All-Star game so far, the second one that we've seen in the PLL, is that with as good as we know the offensive talent is in this league, midi, attack, whatever, as good as the offensive firepower and the talent in this league is that we know of, the MVP of the All-Star game now, back-to-back years that it's been held, have been from the goalie position. Jack Kincannon won the first ever All-Star MVP in 2019, and Troutner followed that up the other night in the 2021 All-Star game, winning MVP of that game. So, like I said, for as much firepower and offensive talent as we know this league possesses, just very interesting to me that the first 2 All-Star MVPs have come from the goalie position. And I thought the face-off situation throughout the game, how they switched up the rules and did different things to throw some curveballs at these guys, I thought it was interesting. I'm not really sure, though, how I felt about it watching it. And I know if you even listened to when they talked to Trevor Baptiste about it in the game, he even said, yeah, not sure how this is going to go. We're not really sure what we're doing, but like, we're going to give it a shot and we're going to just try to put on a show. And I think that when you have some of these guys like Baptiste, Nardella, TD Erlin, whoever in that game who are the best of the best at their position, you can afford to throw some of those wacky curveballs at those guys and watch them make those adjustments in game like that. How he said, we have no idea what's going to happen, but hey, we're going to just give it a shot. And I think that, like I said, I'm not really sure how I felt about some of those rule changes, like doing the hockey style puck drop and those things. But like I said, it was fun watching these guys get a little bit uncomfortable playing a position that they're normally the best in the world at, and seeing them make those kinds of adjustments in the middle of a game like that, and watching guys like Baptiste and TD Erlin going at it at the face-off stripe in that game. But I thought the game itself was actually pretty highly competitive, and when you compare it to things like, let's say, the NBA All-Star game where it's all offense and no defense, I actually felt like, despite the score being as high scoring as what it ended up being, I felt like with a guy like Troutner getting MVP and making, 14 saves in the game, I thought there actually was quite a bit of defense in that game where it actually made it enjoyable to watch at both ends of the field. And again, like I said, the guys going at it at the stripe as well made it even more so interesting to watch. But the game itself was highly competitive, I thought, and there was a lot of highlight worthy moments which were lighting up social media. Even Sports Illustrated on Twitter was posting stuff from the All-Star game and from the skills competition as well. I believe I saw them post Romar Dennis's winning run in the fastest player challenge, and I believe they also posted Costabile hitting the backflip after his long bomb as well. But having things like that blowing up over social media had to be something that the social media team for the PLL, especially with people like Lisa Redmond and Emma Adams, who sort of lead the charge in terms of social media, I'm sure that they were thrilled about seeing that stuff all over Twitter last night and everything that was being thrown out there on Instagram as well. But one thing that I hadn't realized going into the All-Star break is that this next week now is a bye week. Going into the July 23rd weekend is a bye week for the PLL. So many of the players that opted out of the All-Star game itself and participating in that weekend did so in order to get that extra week to recover going into the final 2 weeks of the regular season. So that's something that I wasn't really aware of going into the All-Star break, but now something that I'm definitely more aware of going into this week now, a bye week in the PLL. So that'll be huge, like I said, for teams like the Atlas and the Chaos, who currently have Jack Kincannon and Blaze Reardon, respectively, listed on the injured list heading into that All-Star break when that was released late last week. So I think just overall, my thoughts on the All-Star game as a whole is that the game was what it was. It was exciting, it was energetic, competitive, whatever kind of adjective you want to use to describe it, and it was filled with highlights, like I mentioned, which we saw all over social media yesterday. And in the end, it wasn't really about who won the game. Like, I know on Thursday's episode, Coach Shrek asked me who I thought would win the game, and I said I honestly don't know. And if I'm being honest, I'm not really one that cares about who wins the All-Star game, because it's not really about who won the game. It's more about just entertainment value. And I feel like we really were given that entertainment value on Sunday night in San Jose. And really, it was about getting the sport in front of more people, getting more people to watch it, getting more people to understand it, I guess you could say, and really see just how electric the product on the field can be. And I think that is something that took another step forward with this league on Sunday night. So it's not really about which team won the game per se. I think it's more so that, in a way, the league won, and I think the sport of lacrosse, especially at the professional level, is a winner from Sunday night in the All-Star weekend. So we're going to take a quick break. Segment 2, like I said at the top of the show, we're going to get into some fantasy lacrosse discussion. I've got some things that I want to talk about with that and how the PLL can be involved with that. But you're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Segment 2 of the show. Top of the show, we talked about the All-Star game and how electrifying that was. on Sunday night in San Jose. Segment 2, I want to get to some fantasy lacrosse discussion. Haven't really done a whole lot of that since the 2020 championship series here on the podcast. So I participated in fantasy lacrosse back in 2020 during the championship series using Flow Fantasy Inc. And my experience that year was actually it was a very positive one, I thought. And I felt really good about what they were building as far as a fantasy lacrosse platform goes moving forward into 2021 and beyond. And I think considering it was a new thing in the league, format for the championship series was a little bit screwy compared to what they normally do with the tour-based model because of COVID. I thought all things considered for a first go-around and the season being what it was, like I said, I thought they did a phenomenal job putting it together, and I thought that the scoring system could have been a little bit better, but again, I can't really complain there. But yeah, I thought that for a first go around, it was definitely better than no fantasy lacrosse at all. And like I said, I really thought that they had kind of the right idea going, and it was something that they could build off of in the future. And I know specifically with 2021, I had very high hopes going into this summer, only to unfortunately have it derailed at the last possible minute. Some of that not necessarily their fault. Some of it was more so just with my specific league that kind of fell apart, but I'll explain that a little bit. Is that one of the guys in our league, I'm not going to name names, but one of the guys in our league had to drop out at the last minute because from what we were told by somebody who had drafted the night before our draft, said that there was no auto drafting option like there was in 2020 where you could auto draft your team if you weren't able to be there live to do it yourself. And so because of the fact that we heard there was no auto draft option, one of our players unfortunately had to drop out of the league. So we had to now scramble literally like the day of our draft to replace them. So I messaged a bunch of people that were still in our league and said, hey, we need to fill his spot. Do you know anybody? So eventually we did get somebody. Then after we got that person locked in and we're like, okay, cool. Now we've got the same amount of guys as we did before, like we're ready to rock. Two of the other guys that I had talked to said, oh yeah, my buddy will sign up right now and everything. So we ended up having still an odd number of people in the league, and I didn't think that would work out very well. I was shooting for more of an even number. I think we ended up with about 9 or so, maybe 11 teams in our league, some odd number like that. And so they were saying, yeah, my buddy's going to sign up. He'll sign up. And I'm like, okay, because our draft is in like 5 hours and you keep saying they're going to sign up, but nobody's signed up yet. So I don't know what's going on. So just a lot of confusion there as to who was playing, who was not playing, that sort of thing. So that really kind of was a downer about the draft process itself, and kind of killed some of my high hopes for the season. And then, like I mentioned, how we had heard the night before our draft that there was no auto draft option. Another person that participated in our league, who was the same person that participated in the previous draft, was the one that was kind of informing me of some of the issues that they ran into with their draft that night. And some of those included not all the players being listed to be draft eligible, such as some of the rookies not being present in the draft pool for players that you could pick from, and just different things like that. And obviously the no auto draft option was another kind of downer going into our draft. And he said that teams actually backed out in the middle of their draft because the draft process was, in their minds, just such a mess and so difficult to navigate that some of their teams actually left the draft in the middle with only a portion of their team actually selected. And I thought that was really discouraging because, like I said at the top of the segment, I really had high hopes for what this fantasy lacrosse could have been in 2021, and to see that wasn't necessarily panning out that way, it wasn't necessarily coming true, I thought was kind of discouraging. But I think really when you look at it, the PLL needs to get involved with fantasy lacrosse. Obviously, we know that they're involved with sports betting, with DraftKings and things like that, but I really think that something else they can get involved in is the idea of fantasy lacrosse, and there's a couple ways that they can go about doing it, where possibly they develop it themselves in-house. Maybe they get some of their web developers and whoever to work on that with their stats team, or maybe they partner with a fantasy platform like ESPN. I've been told in the past that they're working to actually get their game scores posted on ESPN. So if you go to the score tab up at the top, their games will actually show up there. So it could be possible that they could get a platform like ESPN to host PLL Fantasy Lacrosse, or they could buy out an idea like Flow Fantasy Inc. for their platform and develop that the way that they want it to be. So like I said, they've got a couple options there as far as getting into fantasy lacrosse itself. And I think either way they go about doing it, the PLL needs to take control of the fantasy landscape as far as the PLL fantasy landscape goes, because that will allow them to control the product that's out there promoting their league, so that they can, like I said, they can develop it the way that they want it to look, with the features that they want it to have, and really be a part of quality control with the fantasy lacrosse product itself. And there's also ways that they can promote it and market it as well. Do things like some sort of contest or promotion with it as well. So just whatever they can do to promote the fantasy lacrosse experience, whatever they can do to promote the league itself, is something that I think they can and should be involved with. And I think that by them getting involved with it and being sort of the quality control, like I mentioned, it'll ensure that stuff like players being absent from the draft pool doesn't happen, or things like the fantasy stats being updated in real time and not after the game ended, like hours before, things like that they can control. And I think that they can better develop than maybe something like Flow Fantasy can. Maybe they have the better resources and the financial ability to go out and make a higher quality product in that instance. And like I said, it all comes back to the quality control. You put your name on it, so you want to make sure that the product that you're putting out is the highest possible quality that you can get. So I think that the PLL needs to be involved with that. And the bottom line really is that the PLL can and should take full advantage of fantasy lacrosse, and I think it'll be another online tool in their tool belt, along with things like sports betting, and it'll bring more people closer to the league. It'll get them more interested in watching the game and actively participating in the sport of lacrosse itself as a viewer. And I think that goes along with, like I said, how they came up with doing the sports betting, getting people more interested in the games, getting more interested in the on-field product, actively watching the games and actively following the league. And I think it could also add to the broadcasts as well, where you can put up graphics with players' fantasy numbers for either that specific game or even for the season as well. So doing things from a broadcast standpoint, I think as well, could be implemented with the idea of doing fantasy lacrosse. So I'd love to get back into playing PLL fantasy lacrosse in 2022, but not if we're seeing the kind of issues that I had heard about at the start of this summer here in 2021, because from what I heard, it was basically a miracle that people even completed their drafts entirely. Although, like I said before, some of them actually finished the draft early. They dropped out early with just partial rosters completed. So like I said, I'd love to get back into doing some PLL fantasy stuff in 2022, maybe starting up a league again, getting people to join and talking about it more here on the podcast. but not until I see some changes being made to the platform itself and having it be a little more user friendly. So we got one more segment to hit. Like I said, top of the show, we're going to get to one thing for each team these last 2 weeks of the regular season. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Final segment of the show, Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. If you missed any part of the show so far, the first 2 segments, you can go back, check that out anywhere you get your podcasts, Google, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn. We're now on as well. In the last few weeks, we added those to the lineup. We talked about some fantasy lacrosse in segment 2 and what I want to see with that moving forward. Top of the show, we talked about the All-Star game from Sunday night in San Jose. Final segment here, we're going to get to one thing for each team the last 2 weeks of the regular season, and we're going to go 1 through 8 down the PLL standings. And I'll give you my one thing for each team. So starting with the first place Redwoods, they come into the post All-Star bye week 4-2 overall and top 5 in every major statistical category on the PLL website. So definitely playing at a high level are the Redwoods. And my one thing for these Redwoods are penalties, because they take the second most penalties in the PLL. But on the flip side of that, they also possess the league's #1 penalty killing unit, killing off 12 out of 15 man up opportunities that they've given up to opponents. So something that they took, I guess you could say, a weakness of this team and turned it almost into a strength of their team. Second place Water Dogs come in at 4-3 overall. They're top 4 in every major statistical category except for goalie play, where they ranked last in the PLL so far this year. So my one thing for the Water Dogs here is to continue building on the success they found in week 5. And especially the goalie play with Dylan Ward is going to have to be more like what we saw in those week 5 games where they beat both the Cannons and the Chrome. He'll have to keep playing at a high level like that going forward these last 2 weeks of the regular season for the Water Dogs to continue their success that they found, like I said, that they found in week 5. For the third place Atlas, the offense, I think, has been absolutely humming these last couple weeks as the Atlas now check in 4-2 on the year. And the defense, I think, is starting to play well together, where they held the Chaos scoreless for nearly 24 minutes in their last game in week 5. And they have 3 games left against teams below them in the standings. Yes, I still think the Water Dogs should be below them in the standings, but that's not the point of what I'm talking about here. And 2 of those 3 games that they have remaining are against teams that they've already beaten in the Chrome and the Cannons. And I think that coming out of this bye week post All-Star break, possibly getting a guy like Jack Kincannon back will, I think, be a big boost for this team. So hopefully, given the fact that he has an extra week or so to recover, hopefully they can get him off the injured list and back these last couple games, because even despite the play of JD Colarusso in week 5 against the Chaos, I still think it's going to be important for them to get him back at least come postseason. So my one thing for Atlas is their power play efficiency, because they rank last in the PLL in that category and only have 7 chances on the year. So when they get opportunities to go man up, they don't get many of them, but when they do get the opportunity to go man up, they need to start burying those chances, because when you contrast their power play versus their penalty kill, they're only 2 of 7 on the power play, but they're 6 out of 8 on penalty kill. So while they're only scoring 2 goals in the man-up situations, they're only giving up 2 goals at the same time on penalty killing. For the Whip Snakes at number 4, the Whip Snakes I don't think are entirely who we think they are. I think the work of Joe Nardella at the stripe this year has sort of blinded us in a way from how poorly they've actually played in almost every other statistical category of the game, where the Whipsnakes rank 6th in offense and defense. They're 7th in goaltending despite having an all-star in Kyle Bernlohr, and they're last in penalty killing, although they do possess the league's number 2 power play. So my one thing for the Whipsnakes is that the offense needs to be better, scoring just 9 goals a game over their last 3 games. They're 1-2 overall in that span without Matt Rambo, and they just need to score more goals and put a guy like Joe Nardella back at the stripe to win faceoffs for them. And I think that'll sort of take some pressure off that defense and Kyle Bernlohr in the cage. 5th place are the Archers. They've lost 3 straight now by 1 goal each, kind of making them the new Cannons at this point in the season. They've given Drew Adams some time in the cage, and while he's played well, I think you have to ride with Adam Gittleman the last couple games of the regular season, in my opinion, because he's 61% on the year in terms of save percentage, but he only played half of one game a couple weeks ago, and then they sat him completely in another game that they ended up losing to the Chrome. Now, not saying that that was Adams' fault, because I thought he played fantastic. That was more of one of those defensive battles where neither team could really get much going offensively, so I don't blame Drew Adams for them losing that game, but I think that Gittleman has to be your guy in the cage moving forward these last 2 weeks of the regular season. And I mean, otherwise, other than that, the Archers are 3rd offensively, they're 1st defensively, they're 1st in power play, and they're 3rd on penalty kills. So they are statistically one of the top teams in the PLL this year, and they hold the league's top score differential at +22. The next closest team is the Redwoods at +8. But my one thing for the Archers here is faceoffs. They are 6th in the league in faceoffs, ahead of just the Chaos and the Cannons at 45% for the year. And we've talked about the Chaos and the Cannons struggles at the stripe this year. So they're just ahead of both of those teams at the stripe. Stephen Kelly's faced off at 47% for the year, but they went with Connor Gaffney in their game against the Cannons, where he went just 9 of 23 in that game. I believe that's a 37% go of it in that game. Again, math is not my strong suit, so I'm just guessing there, but 9 for 23 in that game on faceoffs. And so yeah, I think faceoffs for them is kind of their one thing that they need to be better at moving forward, because like I said, statistically in almost every other category, they're top 3 in the league. 6th place is the Chrome at 2-4. The Chrome are last offensively, they're 3rd defensively, and pretty much middle of the pack in everything else statistically. And this team has battled through some key injuries this year, but then again, so have a lot of teams in this league. Obviously, like I said, Kincannon's out with his groin injury for the Atlas. Chaos might be without Blaze Reardon. We're not sure how severe his injury is. So obviously some of these other teams, Matt Rambo being out for the Whipsnakes, these teams have all at some point or another battled injuries this season. So it's not just the Chrome. And even looking at a team like the Chaos, who had to deal with a bulk of their team being on the travel restriction list for the first couple weeks of the season. So again, every team's kind of had to battle some roster issues, but one thing for the Chrome here is that their remaining schedule is something that I'll be watching for these last couple weeks, is that while they have to play the Atlas the first game back from the All-Star bye week, and the Atlas might have Jack Kincannon back for that game, the Chrome have 2 very winnable games in my mind after that Atlas game against the Chaos and the Cannons. And if they go 2-1 in those 3 games, they might be able to back their way into the playoffs at either that 6th or 7th seed and push a team like either the Chaos or the Cannons out of the playoffs, sitting at that number 8 seed. So for me, the Chrome, their one thing is their remaining schedule and how they fare in those remaining 3 games of their regular season. Number 7 are the Chaos, and the Chaos are only top 4 in one major statistical category, and I'm sure we can all guess what that is. which is goaltending. And so my one thing for the Chaos here is that the downside to Blaze being sort of their bright spot this season, again, he's listed on that injury report prior to the All-Star weekend. So if a guy like Blaze is out for a significant period of time here these last couple weeks, if he misses one game for them, I think that could be really costly for this Chaos team who's trying to make a late season push to at least make it as one of those last 2 or 3 seeds in the postseason. So for the Cannons to round it all out here on the Monday edition of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, for the Cannons, they found a way to win a 1-goal game finally, and as Lyle Thompson said after that game, this is their playoffs. They can't afford to lose another game at this point in the year. They have 2 games remaining in the last 2 weeks, and even if they don't, even if they do win a game if they do go 2-0 those last 2 games, if they go 2-0 those last 2 weeks, even if they do, they still might need a miracle to make the 7th seed and back their way into the postseason and avoid falling out at number 8. So my one thing for the Cannons, in order for them to do that, is that Lyle has to be the guy these last 2 games on offense. He was named Player of the Week in Week 5 for his 9-point outing against the Archers, where he had only 2 turnovers. That's something I've talked about before, where he struggled a little bit with turnover issues the last couple games. But in his last 4 games, he has 12 points and 15 turnovers, 9 of those 12 points obviously coming in that one game against the Archers. So again, struggling a little bit, especially with the turnover issues. And that includes that 4-game stretch. That includes a game against the Atlas where Michael Rexroad held him to just 2 assists and 5 turnovers. And the Water Dogs a couple games later held him without a single point and had another 5 turnovers in that game. So my one thing for the Cannons is going to be Lyle Thompson sort of putting this offense on his back and making plays down the stretch, not turning the ball over as much, and just going out there and being sort of the guy that we saw that Sunday afternoon against the Archers a couple weeks ago. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. You can check out the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, such as Google, Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud. You can now get it on iHeartRadio and TuneIn as well. You can also check out the show on YouTube, another place to get it. Let me know what you guys think. I'd love to get your thoughts on PLL Fantasy Lacrosse here in 2021. See from some of you who have been playing Fantasy Lacrosse this year what your experience has been like. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.